thank you for joining us for our last full day of panel dialogues for Trade Week. It's been an outstanding week. We've had some great conversations from everything from doing business in Indian country to digitization, and now today we are here to talk about public-private partnerships. Now, many of you might not be that familiar with P3s, but we have a panel of experts today, actually two individual panels of experts to talk all about P3s in terms of why public-private partnerships are so significant to Louisiana and why they can be used for infrastructure and transportation investment and alternative financing mechanisms. So with us, we have here today is our moderator, David Baxter. And David is an international specialist in the P3 models. And David is actually a senior PPP advisor to the International P3 Resilience Center in New Orleans and a freelance international development infrastructure consultant. He has led teams that have provided P3 and concessionary capacity building programs and infrastructure advisory and consulting services to over 40 international clients over the past few years. Clients were located in Africa, North America, Latin America, the Middle East, Europe, and Southeast Asia. Many projects were sponsored by development and donor agencies, including USAID, MCC, ADB, the Dutch Foreign Ministry, the African Development Bank, and the World Bank. He's also led alliance building initiatives with institutions around the world, including that of the UNECE P3 Center of Excellence in Geneva, the African Development Bank, and the P3 Center of Excellence in Istanbul, Turkey, including the Islamic Development Bank and, again, the World Bank. David has helped develop best practice strategies that have advanced sustainable and resilient P3s around the world. And he's with us here today to help moderate this incredible panel of local and national experts to talk about how P3s can in turn help Louisiana build solid infrastructure for the years ahead. Please help me in welcoming David Baxter.
So good morning, everyone. And as soon as I start speaking, I know everyone asks, where is he from? I'm originally from South Africa, so you think you live in the deep south. I live even further south than you do. So I understand the South, and I'm very comfortable with its cultures and traditions. But this is a wonderful opportunity this morning to talk about public-private partnerships. Everyone has heard about them. Governments across the world and in the United States are exploring them as opportunities. And they range from a full series of sort of informal partnerships where the public and the private sector get together to collaborate on something, to formally structured deals which are contractually bound, can last for 20 to 30 years in duration, and which are focused on building very, very large infrastructure projects. These could be ports, airports, highways, toll roads typically is what people are used to, and where there's an agreement between the government and a private developer to share revenue and also to share risk. That's one of the big things that's important, is that people don't often understand the risk sharing. And it's a fine balance. I'm currently working on a project in Sri Lanka, and a government official made a very astute statement when I was there 3 weeks ago. He said to me, we're trying to understand how to implement really good PPPs, but we are always concerned, and I think you'll hear this from a political point of view, that when we think about PPPs, we often think of the privatization of profits and the nationalization of debt. And I thought this was really interesting, because it seems at times people hear about the deals that go bad. You don't hear about the really good deals that are successful. And usually then the argument is that the private sector made too much profit and the project went wrong, and the public sector then took the debt and struggled with it. And it doesn't have to be that way. I'm going to introduce the panel. We have a very, very interesting and I would say illustrious panel here that represents the who's who of events and developments that are taking place in Louisiana. You have a new PPP law, and these gentlemen are on the vanguard of what is moving forward. So I'm going to introduce them in no particular order, just other than the way I set up my notes. So there's no seniority. So the first person I want to introduce is Jeffrey Rosell, who's the Deputy Director of the Regional Planning Commission, and he's the second gentleman from me. He's the Deputy... He's the Deputy Director of the Regional Planning Commission, and he has responsibilities that include staff manager for the MPO. He does travel, demand modeling, air quality conformity analysis, transportation improvements program, and the long-range development plan for New Orleans. Prior to joining the commission, he was also project manager for the planning and environmental phases of the Regional Transit Authority's Canal Streetcar project. He also worked as a planner with the New Orleans-based engineering and planning firm in New Orleans, and was a hub supervisor with UPS. He's a graduate of the University of New Orleans, so you can't be more New Orleans than that. And with a master's degree in urban and regional planning, and served in the Louisiana Air National Guard over 9 years. He is a certified planner by way of the American Planning Association, a member of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, an ex officio board member of the Louisiana Public Transit Association, past president of the Louisiana Planning Council, and an adjunct faculty member of the Planning and Urban Studies Department in the University of New Orleans. Then we have Tommy Clark, who is the commissioner for the Multimodal, and you added one, Multimodal Commerce of Louisiana. I apologize about that. He's also a Louisiana native, was appointed on August the 3rd, 2016 by Governor Bell Edwards as the first commissioner of the Multimodal Commerce of the Multimodal Commerce, a newly formed office within the Department of Transportation and Development. He has a 25-year history that started in 1977 with the Kansas City Southern Railway Company. He formed his own consultancy, Clark and Associates, a few years later, and he's represented many companies, non-government and governmental organizations. He was appointed by 2 Louisiana governors and 4 gubernatorial boards and commissions, among them the Louisiana Investment and Economics Prosperity Commission, the Louisiana Community and Technical College Board of Supervisors, and the chairman of the I-49 North Funding and Feasibility Task Force. He was recruited in 2011 to join the Petrohawk Energy, which was then taken over BHP by BHP Billiton. He has held numerous leadership roles in civic, community, and state boards, and he and his wife Marie reside in Baton Rouge and have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. Then we have Tyson Moeller from the Union Pacific. He's the director of network development. He's responsible for developing rail capacity for freight in the southern region for the Union Pacific through public-private partnerships. His previous roles working in UP, he worked with ports in the Gulf region and customers to build rail infrastructure and ensure a world-class customer experience. His experience at Union Pacific spans more than 22 years, and it comprises an impressive set of accomplishments in multiple business units, including industrial products, intermodal, autos, and chemicals. Tyson graduated from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with a business degree in marketing and management, and he minored in communications. He's currently based in Union Pacific's Southern Regional Headquarters in Spring, Texas. Finally, and not least, we have Robert Landry, who is the Vice President for the Port of New Orleans. He is the Chief Commercial Officer for the Port of New Orleans and has been with the port since 1989. Previously, he served as Director of Marketing and a Senior Manager of Operations. He came to his post in New Orleans with nearly 5 years of experience as a manager of marketing research for the South Carolina State Ports Authority in Charleston. Previous to that, he was a marketing instructor at LSU, Clemson University, and the College of Charleston in South Carolina, where he taught international business, market research, and consumer behavior. As Chief Commercial Officer, his focus is attracting new liner services and developing new cargo flows through the Port of New Orleans. He is also responsible for working with both the state and local economic development agencies to increase maritime investment in New Orleans. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in science degree in marketing from Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. He is a member of the Louisiana District Export Council, the French-American Chamber of Commerce, the International Business Committee of the World Trade Center, the Transportation Committee of the World Trade Center, and the Louisiana European Alliance Partnership. He is also a member of the Chairman's Council for the New Orleans Chamber of Commerce. He's married, and he and his wife, Terry, have 1 son, Rob. So almost breathless trying to read these extensive bios. And sometimes the sentences go on and you wonder where you breathe before you pass out from lack of oxygen. But it's wonderful to have these highly experienced gentlemen with us. We're going to just have, we've discussed some questions that we're going to talk about, but I do want to encourage the floor at all times to please ask questions. This is not meant to be a situation where you just listen to us. We would, if you have questions about PPPs, if you have questions about some of the big developments that are taking place, the direction, things that are happening here, then feel free at any time to put up your hand and we will pass the mic. I just do ask two things. If you can keep your questions to a manageable question so that we don't have to, try and digest what you said. If it's direct, that would be very helpful. And the others, if you would also just introduce which organization that you represent so that everyone in the room has the benefit of that. So I'm going to first of all just start from this side and pass it on and have a general question to each person on the panel. And it's very simple, what is your interest in PPPs? Is your organization exploring PPPs? And if it is, what is the idea or how do you intend to implement them? So I'll start with you.
First of all, thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to be here. Simple answer to all your questions is yes, we are interested in PPPs. We are exploring them. More importantly, we have entities that come to us every day, maybe not every day, but very frequently with ideas for PPPs. I think when we look at it from a port perspective, one of the things that attracts us about PPPs is recognition of the fact that, first of all, every project that we're getting involved in is getting bigger, more expensive, and a lot more complex. I think the other factor that really comes into play is that more and more often the marketplace is getting a little bit more congested. Congested may not be a good word, but the marketplace is getting a little bit more complicated. It's also having closer ties with the companies that do businesses, recognizing that having them as a partner is much better than having them as a tenant sometimes or certainly as a competitor. So from our standpoint, getting companies involved in the businesses where we have an interest is significant. It's an interesting process for us in the sense that a lot of times we are approached, we get unsolicited PPPs, and people, of course, make you sign NDAs. They don't want anybody else to hear about it. They don't want you talking about it. So there's very little that we can say in public about a lot of things that are going on, but it's always surprising that these ideas do tend to kind of leak out and people tend to know a little bit more about what's going on than you might expect. I think from our standpoint, when we try to go through a PPP process, we do try to maintain that NDA agreement. We do try to honor all the confidentialities that we had promised. But at the same time, as a public agency, we are limited. Probably one of the biggest issues we have with PPPs is that basically we're an open book. Anybody can file a records request for documents and we have to turn them over. Our attorneys have told us consistently that we are really not protected by most of the NDA agreements. So we've actually told companies coming to us now, hey, don't give us any documents, don't send us any emails, let's talk, and that way there's nothing in our possession. It's really slows the process down and makes it a little more cumbersome than it has to be, but at the same time, operating as a public agency and trying to protect all the interest that companies are bringing to us, it's something we have to do.
Yes, thank you, David. I think, again, the short answer is yes. From our perspective at Regional Planning Commission, we are searching for essentially other funding partners. The traditional funding partners and the traditional funding streams are drying up. That we are experiencing less revenues and greater expenses. And so, yes, we are looking for partners for various infrastructure projects. We work primarily in highway and transit investments. And so, we partner with DOTD, who is our primary partner on the highway side. But yes, there are several projects that are going on that would lend themselves to P3 participation. a lot of that, a lot of the groundwork that would need to be done has to do with the getting the project through the NEPA process, which is what a lot of what regional planning does. So, which would allow for more governmental participation, but ultimately, and as we see the future, the revenues from the public side are not rosy, and so we are looking at partnerships on wherever we can find them, essentially.
Thank you. At the state, we're looking for any and all money that we can find. I think we've turned over every seat cushion over the last few years to try to find every bit of pocket change that we can find. Do we want to do P3s? Absolutely. Have we done one? No, we have not. And the Secretary just announced last week our first project that we will excuse me, be entertaining the P3 will be the Bell Chase tunnel replacement and the bridge. So that will be our first foray into the P3 world, and we have to do it right in order to entertain doing another one, because there's a lot of, we have to balance the political and the policy side as moving forward. So we have to prove that we can do it, and we have to do it right. And we have a lot of challenges with the revenue sources that are available to us to partner, but we are certainly open and willing to do and explore all P3 opportunities that we can.
Good morning. My name is Tyson Moeller with Union Pacific Railroad. Briefly, so I'm a little bit different from the other panelists because we're a private entity. A lot of folks do look at the railroads, they look at us as a public utility, but we actually are a private utility or company. So everything that we do is based off of what our investors expect, and we have to have a return on investment on this. So we operate in 23 different states. If you think of Chicago down to New Orleans, from a gateway standpoint, we operate further west to the West Coast there to California. So that's really our network. So whenever we look to spend capital dollars, we're looking at all of our franchise in 23 different states as far as where the right place to spend. We spend about $3 to $4 billion every year for capacity. So it's significant. We're about a $19 billion company. So it's about a quarter of our revenue that we put back into the railroad every year. And so what we look at, we do a lot of public-private type partnerships. I would say probably more extensively in the West Coast and up in the Illinois area because they have very formal programs. It's not something that we have in the South. So I cover the southern region, which includes Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. So we spend $3 to $4 billion. That doesn't accomplish everything that we're looking to do. And there are things that we can do from a rail perspective that have direct public benefits. And so we'll talk a little bit later in some of our conversations, but there are things that you can, our motto is you can take trucks off the road, which reduces some of the congestion for the general public. But that's the way we look at from a public-private partnership. We will accept those, but we have to make sure that there aren't too many strings tied to those dollars that come to us from a public perspective.
Thank you. One thing that really I found the interesting comment that was made on unsolicited proposals. Often governments are very excited when they look to the private sector for innovation and new ideas. And you will find this situation, and this happens internationally, that in many instances governments almost get flooded with masses of unsolicited proposals from the private sector. In some ways, this is good because it introduces governments to ideas that they maybe hadn't thought about, but at other times, it can become a bit of a distraction because governments often will have their pipeline of PPP projects or their focus, and then every time a unsolicited proposal is introduced, you have to consider that one as well. And one of the biggest challenges around unsolicited proposals is intellectual property, the confidential information that is shared. And I was just wondering, Tyson, as from the private sector, if you had to consider, as an unsolicited proposal, you were going to present information that you felt was proprietary or whatever, however you saw it, how you would approach the government in that regard to protect your idea because you do have competitors.
we always have the option to say no. What we're trying to learn, because, and that in reality has been a lot of the railroad's response, is not to supply that information. Ways around that, we're working on some programs through TxDOT where we go through a third party. And so we do sign NDAs, and what they do is they are able to hide some of our confidential information, but be able to show the public benefits. And so in some conglomerated type numbers, they can show the public benefit while protecting our intellectual property rights.
Bobby, I was just wondering, from the government side, you talked about, public requests for information, et cetera, and that. If you had to, dive a little deeper into, the cautions that you'd give the private sector, what advice would you give them in that regard?
From our standpoint, very much like Tyler, whenever we're presented with an issue like this, we usually try to find a third party that can sequester some of these documents so we never have possession of them and they're not subject to FOIA request. In terms of the information we typically receive from companies when they provide unsolicited proposals, we caution them in advance that, hey, whatever you give us will become public if you leave it with us, so please take that into account. As a result, we tend to get, if they leave anything with us, they tend to be very much dummied down type of proposals. They're very superficial. A lot of people will come in, pass out a presentation, and at the end of the meeting pick them up and say, thank you, if you want a copy, we're going to drop it somewhere where you may have access to it, but you don't actually have possession of it, and they leave it like that. At the end of the day, we do reach a point where a lot of the details and a lot of the information, for example, that Tyler was referring to, really does kind of inch into the public domain, and we do our best to say we will not go out and spread this information, but again, we have to comply with the law. At any point in time where we're asked to provide that information, we're going to have to provide in the fashion that the law requires. So from that standpoint, there's not a whole lot we can do. David, if you don't mind, I would like to, excuse me, go back and brush up on a point that you mentioned. One of the things about, excuse me, about unsolicited proposals is that they always tend to come at the really wrong time. For example, right now, we're in the midst of our master plan, and we have two of the biggest unsolicited 3P proposals we've had in the history of the port. And so we're scratching our heads saying, okay, do you go forward with the master plan and do this on the side, or do you delay the master plan and try to incorporate these? Because some of them could be radical changes for what we're doing at the port and the way we operate. And so the timing is a critical issue for us. And again, as a public agency, we feel some responsibility to get information out to people about the port and what we're doing with the public funds. But at the same time, we're kind of being held back by some of the constraints of these NDAs and some of the issues that could have a big impact on the master plan.
Jeffrey, you made a statement, and I know this is the bane of many PPPs, is the whole idea that is, you have to do environmental impact studies, etc., and that typically when a person, especially when it's an unsolicited proposal, proposes it, they are lined up and ready to go. They want to start yesterday, and they've got their investors all lined up, and investors, are very, very impatient. That's what I have found internationally. And one thing that I heard was a wonderful statement once that investors are not sentimental. And by that it was, really, if it doesn't happen, it's goodbye, going off to the next project. And you talked about, environmental, NEPA type things, doing the feasibility studies, the environmental studies. And this can be seen as a killer of projects or slowing them down. Have you worked out, thought about, and it's just ideas of any way of streamlining this to be more PPP friendly? And I know you're constrained by laws. There's federal laws, there's state laws that, streamlining is almost impossible, but I thought I'd just throw that to you.
Well, to the degree we can, again, if we're using, most of our money basically comes from the federal government. And so our participation as an MPO would be or even working with the state would be primarily dealing with federal funds, which are subject to, and there's really no way to get around that. So our participation would be subject to NEPA, and that's a huge part of why P3s haven't caught on around here, at least, is in my opinion, is that the MPO, and I'm sure the state, we work on appropriated money. Private sector works on earned and borrowed money, and there's a huge difference as far as investing in capital and capital projects like that. So getting back to NEPA specifically and how in streamlining the process, there are ways to get it done faster. And there have been numerous initiatives at local and or at least at the state and federal levels to try to streamline that process. At the end of the day, though, there's still a lot of regulatory things that need to be dealt with, and especially with funds that are coming from federal highway or federal transit or other federal agencies, that there are a great deal of strings attached to them. We have worked diligently to try to streamline the process to the extent we can. But a lot of the times it is proven very difficult. There's really no good answer for that, other than we do the best we can and we try to move them as quickly as we can. But and taking a very hands-on approach to getting things done quickly. But there's really no good answer to that.
Any comments from the panel on that regard before I move forward? Okay, so we heard that the state of Louisiana is considering its first PPP, and it was also correctly stated that this could be a make or break moment for the state. People never remember the ones that are successful, and they always remember the ones that are failures. I was just wondering, this panel, if anyone on the panel could just, if I'll pass the mic down, if you talk about the PPP needs, or the infrastructure needs, which type of projects do you think would be PPP appropriate? And I know you come from certain sectors of the industry, so you might be biased towards that, but just, you can mention yours, but if you think of other ones that would be appropriate. So just to get a sense of, what the PPP market in Louisiana could look like in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, or maybe there's no market or whatever. I'll err on trying to be on the positive side.
Well, from the port standpoint, it's very easy to say we have some needs throughout the state, not just in New Orleans, but throughout the state, for infrastructure development for maritime facilities in terms of not only waterborne cargo facilities, but the landside facilities as well. And I think those are opportunities that are existing, and those are the types of 3P opportunities that are coming our ways. But we're a little bit unique in New Orleans, is that in addition to being a port, we also have the luxury of owning 4 bridges, soon to be 5, none of which we want. We would be happy to have somebody come in and say, hey, we can help you replace these bridges, because they all tend to be very old, they all tend to be very expensive to maintain, and they all tend to have problems, again, all at the wrong time. So we would always be open to an idea that maybe doing something with those bridges would be a great opportunity for 3P processes.
Okay, I think there are probably several highway corridors that could benefit, and I would say probably the very high-end corridor type projects in the region, particularly in the higher growth areas. I mean, part of our problem just in our region is that, and really in the state, that we're not a high growth state population-wise. I mean, we're probably among the lowest, or the states growing the slowest. Michigan being like the last, and then Louisiana, at least according to the 2010 census. So there's so it's hard to drum up a lot of business based on high growth areas and trying to meet a capital demand based on high growth, because we just don't have it. But there are, nonetheless, I think there are a lot of projects that kind of smaller scale projects that would enhance network efficiencies, if you will, that would, I think, would where P3s would be very beneficial for both the public and the investors. So I think there are opportunities. I don't think there are any big mega projects out there. Well, the state could probably correct me, but at least from our perspective, I think there are a lot of smaller scale projects that could be done in this region that would benefit of a P3.
So Tommy, I would correct you though. I would say we have had some P3s in Louisiana, and so one of those would be for Port of Lake Charles. Union Pacific partnered with Port there, and they invested in some rail tracks. They brought a grain elevator to the port. It's for export grain, and so I think that's a pretty unique P3 that we did that we started about 10 years ago. It was completed about 2 years ago. So one of the things that I think about P3s is it's very strategic, and it takes a lot of years of planning to get to that point. So you start with this seed of a thought, a concept, and it's going to take 10 to 15 years a lot of times to get to that end. So I think Port of Lake Charles is one. I know Tommy and I, and David Black is here. He's one of our port directors. We're working on a P3 right now in Baton Rouge that I think is going to be very beneficial. It's absolutely beneficial to the state. The rail is kind of that last mile that has to be completed in order for the other private entities that have made those investments to make them successful. So we already have a start there, and I was talking to Tommy a little bit earlier. The opportunity here, part of this panel, is to put together a more formal conversation and strategy for the state when you start talking about transportation and the public benefits there.
No, you're right. I look at those P3s as a hybrid, kind of like my daughter's dog is a Shorkie and a Shih Tzu, and they call it a Shorkie. I don't know. But I guess to kind of get to the gray area, the state of Louisiana in 2001 created the Louisiana Transportation Authority. And that was the first time that granted an authority within the state the right to utilize solicited and unsolicited P3 projects. The only one we've ever done under that model was LA1 toll road, which all the tolls, all the penalties that go with that go straight into servicing the debt. So there is no positive balance at the end of the day in a checking account. In 2016, they modified the legislation to grant DOTD the authority to do P3s for the first time, but only solicited proposals. They cannot do unsolicited proposals. LTA is the only entity that can do unsolicited proposals, and both entities has to be compatible with the state transportation plan, both the priority A and B mega projects. So if they're not in the state transportation plan of 2015, a solicited or unsolicited proposal really can't survive from a state standpoint. Where are we going with all this? I mean, this state has had an aversion to tolls, and tolls has got to be as we see it, one of the major components of funding the public use, the public benefit, just providing that public benefit component to help drive the private enterprise to come on board. Now, we've got a little history of taking tolls off our highways in Louisiana, one being the Crescent City Connection, which doesn't bode well for the public side coming in and the private side, marrying up to do a partnership. So in the 2016 legislation, we made it clear in there that tolls, if a legislator feels like, he wants to take off tolls for his constituency, he can't do that under this scenario. So where are we going with all this? We have a lot of education to do, both on the political side and on the policy side. And I said it earlier, and we have to have successful wins. And this project that we announced last week, we think is a true economic benefit for that region of the state. We've had numerous problems with issues with that tunnel that was built in 1956. I mean, if you want a car wash, go through that tunnel any day of the week. The movable bridge, it was built in the 60s. That's some of the bridges that probably Bobby owns that he wishes he didn't own. I think bridges and some really selective road infrastructure projects in this state are prime candidates for initial P3 projects. Earlier in the year, the state put out an RFI, a request for information for P3s, and we used the I-10 corridor from LA 15 in West Baton Rouge Parish all the way down to Gonzales. It's kind of a test model. We got 26 responses and a lot of lessons learned from that RFI, and developed kind of our preferred model. The design, build, finance, operate, maintain model is kind of our preferred P3 model going forward. So we just are just born so into this process, and that's what I said. We as a state have not really participated in the true P3 partnership that utilizes a concept that we've never used before. We've got a lot of opportunities. We've got a lot of green space between our interstates that are just sitting there. I just moved from Houston, and I'd give my right arm to have a toll tag here in Louisiana to move around with that I had in Houston. But that's just me. I'd pay for a couple of dollars just not to sit in traffic. And I think a lot of people would in this state if they, get the opportunity to do that. I could go on and on about that, but I'll stop.
Tyson and Tommy, one of the things I'm used to being tagged. Tommy and Tyson, you mentioned to me there's a project at the port of Greater Baton Rouge that is evolving, and it's basically where you're exporting pellets, and there's a ripple effect of jobs that can be created through this project. And it's a partnership between the port and Union Pacific Railroad. I wonder if you can just share a little bit of details with us and tell us where you think the value is, what you've seen, what you've learned, maybe some lessons learned that could be shared, that if you look forward at other projects, how things could be smoothed if there were bumps, anything along those lines.
Tommy, you want me to kind of kick it off? Okay. So I think really the genesis of that, like you said, it's kind of a gray PPP type project. The genesis was really the customers that saw a need there. And so the big customers, you've got Drax and Louis Dreyfus. So Drax is wood pellets. They're exporting wood pellets from northern Louisiana over to Europe for alternative coal. And then you have Louis Dreyfus, who's developed a grain elevator there. So I think the real genesis started with them. They saw a need in the marketplace. They've spent, I would say, just shy of $500 million with both the destination as well as the origin facilities that they've put money into. So that's where it really started. And then it's really that last mile right there in Baton Rouge. How many of you have driven through Baton Rouge recently? Good. Okay. So a little bit of traffic, pinch point. So the opportunity, think about a train. When you look at a train, that represents about 300 to 400 trucks. So that one train that you waited 5 to 10 minutes that you're not very happy about waiting for represents 300 to 400 trucks there. So it's an important point because we're shipping about 2 trains a week from northern Louisiana down to the port of Baton Rouge. And so we think that that's where a true, I think, P3 solution that the public doesn't recognize is that trains can be a solution to take trucks. If we have any truckers out there, they're part of the economy as well, but we can take trucks off the road. What that also means is that when we do a P3, if you invest in a road, taxpayers are responsible for all of the maintenance for those roads for the life of those roads or those bridges. Once we do a P3 from a rail perspective and we've taken those trucks off the road, we are responsible for all that maintenance once that's done. So that takes it off of the taxpayers. So we think that rail is a great solution. So going back to the Baton Rouge solution is that the port didn't have enough infrastructure from a rail perspective. And so the customers, the port, the state, and Union Pacific came together and said, how can we help fund this? Union Pacific said, from our perspective, we have to have the right return on investment. So we're able to put a few dollars into the infrastructure there. The port has put up some money. The customers put in a few additional dollars, and the state really helped fund the gap that we had there. So it has really been a partnership. That's where I met Tommy about 2 years ago in working in this project. And without all of the collaboration there between all of those entities, we wouldn't be where we're at.
So I'll try to gloss over the can of worms that it took to kind of get this project moving, that it was stuck in the ditch for when I got into it. You know, it's something to get a phone call the day before you're getting ready to go to Cuba with the governor on a Cuba trade mission that says, oh, we got this project we want you to try to help figure out that's been stuck. And I go, really, what is it? And when I heard about it, I go, oh my God, it's been going on for 4 years, and they 7 years? Okay, 7 years. So anyway, it turned out it's a great project. It's going to move forward. It involves a $20 million rail chambering yard that allows the port to accept, the port tenants to accept and ship and receive 80 to 110 car unit trains.
On top of $11 million.
Yeah, on top of the $11 million that the UP put in for the interchange feasibility for that. But this great story about all this is that it puts rural Louisiana farmers, timber farmers, truck drivers back to work that were once out of work because of a shuttered international paper mill in Baxter, Louisiana that had gone dark. And Drax came in and bought the facility, re-engineered the facility to handle wood pellets, put these timber farmers back to work, put the truck drivers back to work. All of the peripheral and domino businesses that are associated with that are getting back up and running, and enable them to grow, to purchase another mill in Urania, Louisiana, this chambering yard. The economics of going from 40-car unit trains to 80-car unit trains is significant. And it enabled them to come into the project to service the debt. So Port put up money, the state put up money, UP put up money, but the tenants were the key that really kind of put this thing over the top by saying, listen, we will buy the bonds back to service the debt based on a volume commitment that we agree to ship in and out of there. But then it's got a great export story too, of renewable energy being exported to Europe. So we are, we're in the design phase, hopefully going to construction in January, and hopefully cutting the ribbon about this time next year. So stay tuned to that. It has a great story about it.
I'm not going to ask the floor questions quite yet, but can I just see a show of hands that I do give enough time of people that might have questions? Okay, so we do have a few. That's good. Yes, okay. So I just have a few more little, and then we'll hand over the floor. So I'm not ignoring you. Please don't feel that we are trying to avoid your very important questions. Recently, one of the things that happened has been all these major disasters in the Gulf and in the Caribbean that no one can ignore. Everyone has seen the impacts, etc. And it was stated by a number of the panelists that governments are strapped for money. They don't have the resources. They don't have the resources to build new infrastructure or even to replace some of the infrastructure, and that partnerships possibly with the private sector would be more and more important. And I would say that any of the great planning, the strategizing, it was talked about, it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of strategizing that's behind PPPs. Obviously went out the window, because if you can just think of Puerto Rico, for example, with their power utilities, I mean, it's no use even talking about plan B or C or D. It's a new plan and the whole new approach. And internationally, where I've been involved, and I know where we've been involved with the center here in Louisiana, there's now a greater focus on building more resilient infrastructure, and resilience is tied to redundancy, robustness, etc. But another part of it also is the element of recovery. You can build the best infrastructure, but if you don't have a recovery plan, you could have this isolated piece of infrastructure that's standing and it's not connected to a community that doesn't exist anymore, or the other sort of multimodal sort of interactions that take place. And I was just wondering, in the sense of, when every time that I've talked to governments, and I've also talked to the private sector about resilience, The private sector gets nervous because they see it as an added cost, and the public sector gets nervous because they see it as an added form of, monitoring or guidance or, best practices that have to be introduced, and they really, are strapped for it. Just the sense of, from the panel here, ideas that you might have about building more, as I would call it, future-proof, resilient PPPs.
It's a good question. Let's go back 12 years. For those of you who were here through Hurricane Katrina, just to give you a real brief synopsis of what the port went through. Hurricane comes, hurricane moves through, city's flooded. There are probably maybe a couple of people in this room like myself who had the opportunity to spend some nights on some military vessels here that were berthed here to provide housing and food while we tried to get the recovery started. And it became very apparent from a port standpoint that we had a terrific hurricane plan. I mean, when we get hurricane warnings, when we get hurricane watches, every phase of the hurricane, we had a terrific plan. Everybody knew what they were supposed to do. What we didn't have a plan for is what happened after the hurricane, especially one where all your employees are scattered all over the place. All your assets really are lying fallow at that point in time, although we were able to get some of the facilities back up and running within 2 weeks. I mean, we really didn't have a recovery plan. And it's a testament to our former COO that we were able to keep the port running and get people paid and not miss any paychecks and get people back together because he put pieces in place after the storm to make that all happen. And I think that's one lesson that we have taken to heart is that, yes, you do need a resiliency plan. You do need private sector partners. We have companies that are on as-needed basis contracts, which will be heavily utilized should something like that happen again. But I think more importantly, on a very almost arm's length basis, we have developed relationships with companies that will be able to provide assistance to us and know our facilities and know our needs very well so that if something like this happens, they're only a phone call away. As far as the actual engineering of the facilities themselves, I can tell you that we look at that very carefully. If for no other reason, for a large part of our business, we're self-insured. We do have major underwriters that cover a large portion of our property, but at the same point, there's a pretty high deductible. And as a result, we're very, very careful to try to take into account all the needs that may have to be met in order to make sure we maintain that status to keep our insurance rates low and also minimize our out-of-pocket cost. We have looked at a lot of different ways of building facilities, but we're really at a point now where our major cargo facilities are being retrofitted. So we're not actually building the new facilities that you might see in some ports. We're taking existing facilities and repairing them. And so it's not being able to necessarily get them to a higher standard as it is just getting them back to the existing standard to which they were originally built. And sometimes that's based on how deep you can dredge, what time of year you can work, and all those other parameters that come with working on the river. But to the extent that we can, we are trying to build as much resiliency and redundancy into our systems as possible because we know firsthand what happens if you don't.
Okay, RPC does not control any assets directly, so our participation is really on the planning end, and after an event is doing evaluations of what occurred and how to prevent failures if there were any from occurring again. But from projects, as far as resilience are concerned, at the federal level, there is a great deal of interest in planning for resiliency in your programs. RPC is participating with DOTD primarily on doing some resilience type like roadway grade raisings and things like that to prevent, hopefully to prevent roads that are used especially for evacuations from going underwater as storms approach, which is our primary hazard. We, to the extent that there are projects in our program that are helpful, particularly beyond the levee system in our town, and work very closely with the local DOTD district on implementing those projects and working with the locals to identify what parts of the roads actually go under and how we can assist in making sure that they stay open as long as they can. And so,
Well, like it or not, I think the state has, post-Katrina, rewritten every response plan that there possibly could be. And we are looked towards by other communities, as recently as Harvey and Irma, as kind of the go-to resource for how do you handle and prepare for disasters. And I think one of the things that we have deployed, just in the short time that I've been with DOTD, that I've witnessed, is a great exercise in coordination of staging of assets prior to an event, and then coordinating those assets soon after as you can to restore the supply chains. And I think this question had to be teed up by David Dodd, right? No? We are participating on a Louisiana Supply Chain and Transportation Council that is also, focused primarily on the resiliency efforts post-disaster events, and you're seeing this be rolled out all over the state, all over the country, more or less. But we're starting to roll it out region by region using the regional MPOs. Baton Rouge Regional Planning Commission just hired a regional director specifically for resiliency efforts. So, yeah, it is creating probably a job creation component for regional MPOs, but it's one that's going to be aligned with the greater effort of resiliency for restoring supply chains.
From Union Pacific's perspective, we just went through Harvey there in Houston, and Houston's a major complex for Union Pacific out of the 23 states. When Harvey hit with the flooding, it took out over 2,000 miles of track, or as far as we couldn't operate on about 2,000 miles of track in the state of Texas. Within 2 weeks, we got our railroad back up and going. So the railroads really are resilient. And if you think about local communities, how we affect those communities is that if you think about all the refineries, they don't run without rail. And so if you hear about gas shortages and things like that, rails, they're very instrumental as far as making sure that those refineries are up and going and everything. So the other comment that I would make from an infrastructure standpoint, when we look, I think bridges, Bobby, you had mentioned, what we do is we learn from these disaster type occurrences. And what we do is we make sure that if our bridges were built for a 100-year flood, if we have to rebuild them or reinforce them, we'll build them for a 500-year flood, so that we don't have to go back and redo some of that work later on.
Thank you. I think one of the most important statements was, was made or alluded to is the impact of the loss of revenue and operations with infrastructure. As I've mentioned, I'm working on a project in Sri Lanka, and I don't know if you remember, but it was about 10 years ago, there was the terrible Indian Ocean tsunami. And Sri Lanka is an island nation, and it has a ring of facilities, mainly roads and railways, built around the rim of the island. And when the tsunami came in, it devastated railways, it devastated roads, it devastated power corridors. There was no resilience. And the result of that was that railway lines stopped operating for 2 to 3 years. Roads had to be completely rebuilt, etc. If those had been PPP projects, it would have been a disaster. Those projects would have folded because there is no ways that you can, without revenue being generated to service the debt on a PPP, have a successful project. And so this is, I think, one of the biggest concerns that I've been working with is helping originators of PPPs, whether it's the private sector or the public sector, understand that one of the risks that you have to imagine is what happens if your project stops, what's going to happen to the revenue, and how quickly can you recover through recovery plans, mobilization of resources, staging of support that you need before, so that the interruption isn't months, it should only be weeks, because every day costs a lot of money. And, sometimes the public sector could say, well, it's the private sector's concern. But if the private sector company that was set up to run the PPP, the special purpose vehicle, or the project company folds and goes away, it's going to become the public sector's concern, because they will be saddled with an asset that they weren't planning to be saddled with. So really, really important. I want to give the floor the opportunity to ask some questions. So just remember the rules. Try and keep it to one question at a time. We'll give you a second chance. And just to mention or to introduce yourself. So I don't know where the mics are, but we have a gentleman right at the back.
Okay, Vanna. Who had the question?
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Erin Butler with the U.S. Department of Commerce here in New Orleans, so I know most of you, and I know most of the panel too. But I think the Drax example, so I should back up to say that my interest is in creating partnerships between Louisiana companies, agencies, organizations, and international entities. So I think the Drax example is a wonderful one of how PPPs can be used to create the infrastructure that we need to generate foreign direct investment. A lot of the involvement that my agency has with PPPs are overseas projects, when the U.S. entity is the private partner who might be partnering with a foreign public agency to build infrastructure facilities or water management projects and so on. So I wondered about the other direction. Have you had inquiries from potential international partners on the private side interested in working with us here to build out projects in Louisiana?
Yes.
Say more, Tommy.
There is a lot of interest in the Plaquemines Port vision of making it a reality, and there's a lot of Asian investor interest that's just knocking the door down, trying to figure out a way to assist in that endeavor, plus other areas of the state. But yes, there is a lot of foreign investment interest looking at our infrastructure, because they know that we are challenged and we need help. And matter of fact, we've had some Chinese national companies come to DOTD and talk about P3 opportunities for infrastructure. So they are out there.
So I'm going to be selfish and steal the next question. So kind of dovetailing off of that, Tommy, can you talk a little bit more about the prioritization process at the state level in terms of projects that the state is looking at for P3 investment, be they infrastructure or transportation? And one project that comes to mind is also the rail from New Orleans to Baton Rouge.
Oh, you had to go there, didn't you?
I did. A white elephant.
As I said earlier, we haven't done this before, so we're trying to pick the right project to have the right success. And the secretary, there was numerous options to go with, but at the end of the day, he chose the Belle Chase Tunnel as the first project. There are certainly other projects out there that could be P3 qualified. One comes to mind, the connection to the new airport terminal, Loyola Interchange. That certainly, is one that needs to be completed. It was certainly on the short list as a P3 project. As far as the Baton Rouge to New Orleans intercity passenger rail project, that also is a great candidate, given if and when the host railroad allows the right-of-way to be utilized for that purpose. Right now, they are not very much in the entertainment mode of having passenger rail service intertwined into their freight pipeline. But they are considerate of optimizing their right-of-way. If you wanted to build a whole new rail line alongside of their freight line and separate it from any interference of the freight pipeline, they're more than welcome to entertain that. And that could be a P3 opportunity for some private entity that could entertain that. I would suggest, in addition to that, or maybe as a phase one to that, and this is just kind of my my look at New Orleans, and I'm not a planner, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a lawyer. But if we're looking at $1 billion new terminal and we're looking at, soliciting international flights in and out of this airport and creating New Orleans as an international destination, which it is, we should look at how do we make it easier for those international tourists and visitors to get to and from the CBD to the airport. And is there a link, like a light rail, passenger rail link between the airport and the CBD that could be the first component of that links the terminal as an anchor? I know I'm getting off topic here, but that could be another P3 opportunity. I know there's probably some engineers in the room, so I don't think that would be considered an unsolicited proposal, because I think there is some opportunities there that the city and the region and the state could see some benefit from a public-private partnership. Did I answer the question?
Morris Kahn, did you guys use the Port Infrastructure Tax Credit Program in conjunction with the Baton Rouge partnership with the rail project?
No, we did not. There's
Is it-
only been one entity use that so far.
Is it still
It's still there.
legislatively available?
Yeah, it's a pretty complex instrument, and I think there are some efforts within LED to try to simplify it. But right now, I think Bollinger Shipyard is about the only entity that has exercised use of that tax credit yet.
Any other questions? One back there. You're making me get my exercise this morning.
The oil and gas guy in the back.
Hi, I'm Bo Barthelot from Conrad Industries. I'm going to give a little background here so everybody understands where I'm coming from. Conrad is a shipbuilder here in Louisiana. We have 4 yards in Louisiana. We have 1 yard in Texas. I actually focus on the use of LNG, liquefied natural gas, as a marine transportation fuel. My question is, we are seeing, since the expansion of the Panama Canal and actually just global growth, East Coast ports are continuing to expand their capacity to receive more containers and larger vessels. And as I understand it, and Mr. Clark can probably verify this, but when the Army Corps of Engineers takes their budget and starts to decide where they're going to put their funds, the likelihood of success and what is the return on the application or distribution of those funds plays a big factor into maintenance dredging, new dredging, enlargement. I know that in the state of Louisiana, there are several ports outside of the Port of New Orleans, which we all love, that don't necessarily get the funds they need to be as viable as they should be. With the combination of where we're seeing the growth in just marine traffic, the combination of the assets that Louisiana has right now and will have with regard to LNG as marine transportation fuel, but the lack of infrastructure or maintenance on the South Louisiana ports, is a PPP a mechanism to try to offset the lack of federal funding, which basically constrains the ability to maintain and develop these ports? Is a PPP a mechanism, a viable mechanism?
I'll take a stab at it. Full disclosure, Bo and I have had this conversation before, so I would like to think that it is, but then it comes back to what is the public benefit component of that, and I think there is quite a bit of public benefit from it's more of a commerce benefit and a job retention creation benefit. And how do you, I think what we're referring to is the Calcasieu Ship Channel being the lifeblood of all of the LNG, industrial development that's going on in our state. And we stand a great opportunity to, I know Paul uses this word at his Port of South Louisiana, is that they feed the world through their 7 grain elevators. Well, Louisiana stands to fuel the world through all of the vast amount of LNG export facilities that are either under construction or planned for construction. Hence, all this marine traffic, will it then transition to an LNG fueled solution? But we're encumbered by the width and depth of the channel. It was a four lane road type channel authorized many years ago, but through the years, the Corps has not had the funding appropriated efficiently to maintain that 4 lanes. So now it's a 1 lane channel, and you basically have the economics lost of the shipping community of having to light load to get in and out of the channel. And they're also the logistics of moving in and out of the channel. They have to, one has to go up and wait for the other one to come back down. So you're not optimizing the channel the way that it should be. And is there a P3 solution to that to optimize that full channel to utilize it the way that it should be? And is there an economic differential there that perhaps maybe the industry or the users of the channel or the surrounding navigation district of the channel could participate in some way that creates a revolving fund that then, sustains the channel depth? That is the $64 million question.
That was a
Or
great
lot,
question.
lot bigger than that. Another zeros.
Any other questions?
We almost at the end, and I just want to sum up some things that I have heard. The comment was made a few minutes ago that I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an engineer, I was a planner, I think you said. One thing that is really important, and I've seen this with PPP projects, is that you need a multidisciplinary team that has all of those folks involved. You need the planners and you need the engineers because they're going to design the projects. It's the design build element. You need the economic geniuses for the financial side, and then you need the operation and maintenance. It was very interesting. A few months ago, I was speaking to the head of one of the big funds that funds PPPs, and this person said to me, David, we need your help because our lawyers are killing all our projects. And I said, what do you mean they're killing all your projects? She said, because they are so focused on designing perfect ironclad PPP contracts with no flexibility in them for any future things that could happen, for market trends and the unknowns, that no one wants to agree to the contract. And this is, one of the bits of advice that I'd say, that PPPs are moving targets. I don't know if you're aware of this, but where I live in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Skanska and the port in the coast with Department of Transportation in Virginia just agreed on a 99-year PPP. Well, I don't know how long any of you intend to live, but I don't intend to be around in 99 years' time. And you can imagine, the complexities that could happen for these tunnels under the port. Are people even going to be using tunnels in 99 years' time? What is the succession plan to keep that project moving forward? Who's going to manage it? What new technologies? What else is going to be built? Parallel infrastructure that could compromise the project. These are things that are important. PPPs take time. One thing is important for both sides of the equation, the public and the private sector, to understand that there's no such thing as free money in PPPs, and it comes with responsibility and shared risk. It's also a long-term commitment. The average PPP these days is 25 to 30 years in duration for fair-sized projects. So you can just think that you're in for it for the long haul if you decide you're going to do that. It's really important to understand what the public sector and the community's benefit is to be gained out of a PPP, as well as the private sector. In ending, I just want to ask, and I'll pass the mic and then we'll be finished, just 2 questions of the panelists. One thing that excites you about PPPs, and one thing that if you were responsible for a PPP that would keep you awake at night.
I think the one thing that excites most people over at the Port of New Orleans about PPPs is the fact that when you start talking to entities that want to enter into these agreements, they typically bring a fresh approach, a new idea, and a different way of doing business than we've typically done in the past. And as a state agency, sometimes you can kind of get bogged down in the bureaucracy. Sometimes you get bogged down with what a state agency is allowed to do. And even though we have a lot of flexibility as a port, we still have some constraints on us that private sector companies do not have. So sometimes getting these ideas from outside sources is great, and looking at the market a little bit differently. It also clues you into maybe some big changes that are going on in the marketplace. You know, from our standpoint, when I came here 28 years ago, we didn't have steamship lines that were really dying to get into the terminal operating business. Now they're all in the terminal operating business, and they want to grow that into the business. We didn't have a lot of companies coming to us and saying, hey, we'll help you build these facilities. The market was very segmented by, here's what a port authority does, here's what a steamship line does, here's what a terminal operator does, here's what a railroad does, here's what a truck line does. Now all those lines are getting blurred and people are crossing the lines, and it's making a big difference in the way we look at the marketplace and the way we look at potential business. The one thing that keeps me awake at night, and actually you actually touched on all of them, David, is just the legal issues. We happen to have a legal staff which takes very seriously any PPP proposal that's put in front of us, and it does get wordsmithed to the point of you don't recognize it by the time you start to read it a second time. But I think the long-term prospects for some of these things, we've typically made an in-house decision that we're not going to do anything over 50 years, and we'd actually like it to be a little less than that. And part of that comes from experience. We inherited a lot of 99-year leases at the port. Those leases obviously are not very remunerative by today's standards. We're losing money on some of these. Again, it was done at a time when people thought they had to induce business, and they did it by granting some terrific deals back almost 70, 80 years ago. And now as those leases mature and those projects mature, they're not paying their fair share anymore. So we've got to be very comfortable with the financial arrangement in order to make it work.
Similarly, I think the fact that an entity would come in and basically bring money and new ideas to the table is a very positive upside to P3s in general, and that would be, I think that would, from our perspective, that would be a very welcome thing. I think the downside for us would be, as Robert just mentioned, is how over time does this work out for equitably for all parties, and making sure that the public's interest, who I represent, is actually accounted for, and that the public at large kind of gets is protected from risk to the extent we can, and participates in the upside.
Well, from the state perspective, we have a great opportunity, many opportunities. We have 13 billion plus in backlog of opportunities, so no shortage of opportunities to look at, to choose. So I think that's the upside. The downside, or keeps us awake at night, is just the balance of the policy and the politics end of it, because at the end of the day, we still have to balance the Joint Transportation Committee and the education of our legislators, and we have to be successful in the first project. So I think that's kind of the challenge. It's an opportunity and a challenge.
So I think the neat thing about, from a rail perspective, is when we look at PPPs, we're not looking for a subsidy for the railroad to build capacity. We are looking for a true public type benefit. So I think something that we're working in Texas, TxDOT's funding several mobility studies for the Houston complex, the Dallas complex. So what's neat about that is any public project that we go into is going to have an impact on the public, and it'll be a positive one. So what we're looking for is better vehicle mobility through those complexes. So I think that's kind of the neat thing, that we can help the community there. What does keep me up is the legal side, that when we get into these contracts, if you think about things that are good for the U.S., and there's clauses like Buy America, right, which are great for the communities. What you don't understand is there's some components that aren't produced here in the States. And so sometimes from a legal perspective, we could get ourselves in a bind by bringing some of those components. So it's something that we do, that's what keeps me up at night, because if you go after a grant, if it's a $20 million project, you're asking for $10 million, there are certain things like that that could make you liable for that $10 million grant. So those are legitimate concerns when we look at public-private partnerships like that.
Well, thank you very much. We are out of time, I think almost spot on. But one thing that I just want to mention, it's really important also, is to manage expectations about PPPs, to educate. I heard a number of the panelists say you need to educate what people are, what PPPs are. And the other thing is, and I have seen this in many, many countries, is right-sizing the project for the PPP financing. When you start hiring transaction advisors and you hire the teams of lawyers and legal experts and that, whether it's a 50 million project or a 100 million project or even 20 million project, a lot of those costs are constant because you still got to have those people involved. And if the project's too small, it sometimes might not seem to be as viable as a PPP because those overhead costs, if you want to call them, will be too much. And what a lot of states are doing in the United States and what a lot of countries do is that they bundle then smaller projects into sort of a group of projects that makes it viable. But manage expectations and understanding what PPPs is about is critical. So thank the panel very much. It was wonderful. And there is a break now for a few minutes, and I think that is also a chance if you want to have individual questions with the panelists. So thank you.